Thanks to everyone who's joined us so far. I'm Steven Beschloss with America America. Really pleased to be joined by Miles Taylor, who I've been looking forward to talking to for a while, probably since 2018, and we'll talk about that. If you don't know, he's a former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security. He now leads an organization called Defiance.org to defend Americans under attack from the Trump regime and serve as a kind of hub for Americans committed to resistance. He'll tell us more. Ironically, Miles may be best known as Anonymous for authoring an op-ed for the New York Times in September of 2018 called "I Am Part of the Resistance Inside the Trump Administration," and that had a byline of Anonymous. I'd like to discuss that article and the blowback, as well as the investigation of you triggered by Trump earlier this year, clearly as an act of retribution. The reality of Trump operating without guardrails and the work you're doing now with Defiance.org. Let's start here. In the last 6 days, 6 lawmakers, that's 2 senators and 4 House members, released a video to urge members of the military to ignore illegal orders. It was clear and compelling and standing up for the Constitution, which of course led to Trump to claim that this was seditious behavior and punishable by death. Now many of them have been facing violent threats, probably all of them. So what did you think? And did this story, this cause something of a flashback for you?
It really did. And Stephen, I'm sure you and I will get to it. This is the beauty about lives. But I mean, news is breaking as you and I have come on that the James Comey and Letitia James indictments have been thrown out because the judge found that the prosecutor, Lindsay Halligan, was, get this, appointed illegally. And this gets to, I think, a major theme in this administration, which is if you were going to say Donald Trump planned to do something in his second term, you would probably say he planned to focus on revenge and he planned to focus on blasting through democracy's remaining guardrails. That's a more pedestrian way of saying breaking the law.
Yeah.
And
he told us he was going to do it, by the way. So it's, the 77 million people who voted for him, plus, and the 89 million who chose to stay home. They heard, at least some of them, at least a portion of them had heard this plan for retribution and ultimately lawless behavior. So
that's absolutely right. And so, in a sense, people shouldn't be surprised. I mean, people being the president and his allies shouldn't be surprised at all that Democrats, his critics like me and so many others, would be warning that Donald Trump was intending to engage in illegal activity and that civil servants would need to have their antennas up and be wary of it, but also that it's happening in real time. And I mean, that was what was so extraordinary about last week. I mean, well, first and foremost, the most extraordinary thing was, I think, how vile and vicious and unpresidential his rhetoric was. That's in a category of its own, but also how quickly after Donald Trump made those comments that you had judges ruling about things he was doing that were obviously illegal, not weird arcane technicalities. But for instance, a judge ruled within 24 hours of Trump going bananas on these Democratic lawmakers that his troop deployment in Washington, D.C. was, quote, illegal. This was something that was very foreseeable. On June 8th of this year, I was on MSNBC as the news broke that they were deploying troops into Los Angeles. And my comment live on the air was, this is not legal. And it was very foreseeable. But not just then, it was foreseeable 6 or 7 years ago when I was in the first administration and Trump wanted to do similar things. And we ran the traps. We talked to all the lawyers. We engaged the White House. And we came to the president. We said, Mr. President, this would not be legal to do. That was foreseeable. And so he is engaged in the lawlessness right now. It is right in my mind for not just Democratic lawmakers, but any lawmakers to warn civil servants that the president might try to get them to break the law and that they have a right and responsibility to refuse to break the law. And yet that criticism is being met with threats to imprison those lawmakers and suggestions that they should be put to death. That is without precedent in American history. But I'm saying that to a presidential historian who knows better than I.
That's you're thinking of my brother, but I will, Michael. But I will.
You are in your own right.
Well, thank you very much, but I will say this, that you know, we have been told by Trump throughout the campaign, and we witnessed what happened in the last 4 years, and we witnessed that he operated, in that case with, as you noted, in 2018, a collection of people who were trying, their darndest to provide some kind of guardrails. Now we're living in a world where the guy obviously has none, and I want to get to that. I want to get to sort of what the world looks like now to you. But let's go ahead and go back to
Yep.
2018, if we might. So
Sure.
uh, I'm gonna share a little bit of what you said, and I have to say, not just your anonymous essay, but your courageous essay. And you said this. You wrote, many of the senior officials in his own administration are working diligently from within to frustrate parts of his agenda and his worst inclinations. I would know I am one of them. You called him anti democratic. You said the goal is to, quote, preserve our democratic institutions while thwarting Mr. Trump's more misguided impulses until he is out of office for 7 years ago. You said, quote, the root of the problem is the president's amorality. Probably a few more things beyond that. But and I want to add this point, you also credit him for effective deregulation, historic tax reform, a more robust military, and more. So, is this still your thinking? And I mean both the criticism of Trump and the praise. Have the realities of the last 7 years affected your own worldview? Kind of a
Well,
big
I'd
question.
say that the handful of things as a lifelong conservative I wanted to give him credit for, he no longer deserves credit for. I mean, I just started
Yeah,
the deregulation of the government. I would say, now that we have the scope of a full first term and part of a second term to see, Donald Trump has, instead of pulling government out of our lives, put government into our lives every single day in a way that was unimaginable before he became
yeah,
president. On the question of taxes, I think whatever he had done at that point to lower Americans' taxes has been completely wiped away by what he has done on price increases and tariffs. And to give you a specific number, I mean, studies show that the average American family saved about $1,600 a year from Donald Trump's tax cuts, but
mm,
the average American family has paid between $4,000 and $8,000 a year because of price increases we've seen. So
yeah,
forget the tax cuts; they don't matter anymore. He's slapped these illegal taxes on the American people, so that's gone and that's done with. And then I mentioned the United States military and what Trump had done up to that point to bolster the military. I no longer stand by those thin elements of praise, because I think
yeah.
what Donald Trump has done is politicize the military in a way that we've never seen. So, those few compliments that I had for
I
him
understand
since
why
that
you
period of
did it.
time are.
Trying to give some sense. I'm a fair guy here. I'm not just here as an aggrieved employee who's ranting and trying to bring down the
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah. Well, and look, I remain a conservative, and I say to folks all the time, I am vastly more politically conservative than Donald Trump. I always refer to myself as a Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman libertarian. Donald Trump
Oh, you're
doesn't even
one
know
of
what that
the.
means. I mean, if he looked at my bookshelf, he wouldn't understand the books on my
Mm,
bookshelf because he is not a considered conservative. He's not ideologically a conservative. But none of that matters to me right now. I caucus with
yeah,
the Democrats. I caucus with liberals. I caucus with socialists now because they are putting the priority of restoring democracy and the rule of law above everything else. And that's what I think is most important. Now, to the criticisms of Trump in that op ed, look, here's the caveat that I would add if it wasn't obvious to people who read that anonymous opinion piece. The point was that the so called deep state was not a group of people defying Donald Trump's lawful orders.
mm,
We were, as I said 7 years ago, and as the six Democratic lawmakers just suggested, a group of people who understood our oath was to the Constitution and that we should defy illegal orders from the president. Illegal orders. As an unelected
yeah,
bureaucrat, I did not
yeah.
make
Hello. This
my
is not.
job. What's that?
I said it's not complicated. Illegal orders. It doesn't say, just go after, reject the military no matter what happens. It's quite clear what they were saying, but he can't hear that.
He can't hear that. And look, that so-called resistance was far bigger than just me. That included the Vice President of the United States, the White House Chief of Staff, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the White House Communications Director, multiple DHS secretaries. I mean, I could go on. These are people who I would say, behind the scenes, I saw on a regular basis defying illegal orders and
Right.
unethical edicts from the president. We were not there to tell the president, we don't like your policies and therefore we're going to frustrate them. No. I mean, if that was my job, then I should have quit because
Yeah.
that's not what unelected bureaucrats are there for. But when it comes to things the president wants to do, like shooting unarmed people,
Yeah.
you are required to say, this is illegal, Mr. President, and I will not carry it forward. And that same dilemma that I went public with 7 years ago is a dilemma public servants are still facing today. You
Yeah.
could love me or hate me, but that warning is real and it's ever present. And I think it's one of the biggest threats to the American Republic today that we have a
Right.
president who does not believe fundamentally that the rule of law applies to him.
Yeah, well, and his responsibility to protect and defend, preserve the Constitution. And look, he surrounded himself. I wrote today about the miscreants and sycophants that he surrounded himself with, uh, so that there would not be a guardrail. Appears like any guardrail is, thanks to the, John Roberts supermajority on the Supreme Court, who, unfettered, unhinged, freed this man to do whatever he wants, convinced that there will be no consequences. So let me go back. I want to linger 2018 in that op-ed.
Yeah.
How did your life change after it was published? And I mean, it was anonymous, but I can't imagine that it didn't. And you also stuck around for another 2 years. That's not a criticism. I'm wondering how hard was it to do that?
Well, actually, I only stuck around for a little bit more than another 6 months
Oh, I
and then
see. No,
resigned
I
from the
see.
administration in
I
protest.
see.
But, look, it was the destruction in my personal life was just as foreseeable as the destruction I was forecasting in the American Republic if we gave Donald Trump a second term. I knew that when I came forward, given how retributive this man is, that he would do everything possible to try to destroy my life. And he did. When I unmasked myself, which I felt like I had to do before the
Yeah.
2020 election, because I needed to own those criticisms, but more importantly, detail the different episodes, events, meetings to justify my point if I was going to try to persuade people not to give this man a second term. But I anticipated that everything would be wrecked by that. And as
Yeah.
soon as I unmasked myself, Donald Trump came forward at campaign rallies and in press interviews, and he said, bad things will happen to Miles Taylor. And that wasn't a prediction from him, that was an order to his followers
Yeah.
who made sure
Yeah.
of it. I often say to folks, because of my decision to come forward, it forced me to leave my home because of death threats and because of doxing. I lost the relationship that I was in at the time. I was fired from my job. I was forced to get a security detail. And on election night 2020, I found myself in a safe house in Northern Virginia under armed guard with a loaded pistol under my pillow
My
because
gosh.
it had gotten that bad. And I tell people that not for sympathy, I tell them that because mine is just one of so many examples now of
Yeah.
people fleeing for their lives for exercising their First Amendment protected rights. And of course, that was many years ago now. The situation has gotten worse. There are far
Yeah.
more victims who've ended up in that situation merely for dissenting. That's what happened in 2020. I spent 4 or 5 years putting my life back together, married the love of my life, had a baby, grew a family, started a business, and wanted to retreat from public life forever. But of course, as I've warned for many
Yeah.
years, this man is very vindictive. And my concern is that a second term
Yeah.
would be solely focused on revenge against his personal enemies, against enemies of the Republican Party, a full nationwide, whole of society revenge campaign. And that turns out to be what happened, including
Right.
revenge against myself.
Right. So I want to get there. I want to linger on November 5th, 2024. I mean, and you had already been through the barrel. The sickening reality of the president of the United States or a former president of the United States continuing to incite violence, against somebody like you, against judges, against, all kinds of people in public life who are trying to do the right thing. I mean, it's this will never be forgivable. This will never be a period that'll be something to get over. I mean, I think we're going to be dealing with it for an awfully long time. But let's linger on November 5th. So, millions of Americans were shocked to see him again reelected. Uh, especially in the context of like, here's somebody who was going to be unfettered by the Supreme Court with near total immunity. What did you expect at that moment? How terrible was that night or the coming days for you?
Um,
And can I ask one more? Let's add in
Please.
one more. How surprised were you that with all that was knowable, that over 77 million Americans voted for him again?
I think, like a lot of people, I anticipated it would happen at least since the assassination attempt. I mean, I remember the day of the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania against Donald Trump. We were grilling burgers outside at my house, and I went inside to my wife who was cooking, and I told her what had happened. And probably the next sentence out of my mouth was, and he's going to win the presidency again.
Mm,
But I think she and I both anticipated that even earlier. I mean, within weeks of the January 6th insurrection, I was still out there saying, listen, guys, he is incredibly popular all the way down to the base. This isn't going to end him. As much as folks like me went out there and opined about these legal cases against him, I still felt like it was a better than even chance that he was going to be the Republican nominee. And I got into debates with my former colleagues, former cabinet members from the first Trump administration. I won't
mm,
call any of them out, but there was once where a group of us had a phone call about what was happening. And I'd say the majority of the folks on there, people who had served with Donald Trump as well, said, there's no way, absolutely no way he wins the nomination. And most of them thought he wasn't even going to run a second time. And I was the
mm.
outlier in saying, no, he's going to do it. And I don't think that was any special prognostication from my vantage point. I think this man is so deeply infatuated with power, but also he sees his livelihood and his personal freedom dependent on
Yeah.
his continuation in office
Yeah,
and
he
the
he
power.
ran awfully. I mean, I'm sorry, he announced, almost 2 years before, which was, I think, very much a setup to say, like, "I need the trappings of the office to protect me from prison."
Yeah. Well, and look, the night that he won, look, like a lot of people, I was in a very reflective mood. But I had a friend over at the New York Times reach out and say, "Do you want to write another opinion piece?" And I said, "Yes." And the piece that I published the day after Trump's election
Mm,
victory was to say, people of conscience, conservative of conscience, however many are left, should go into this administration, which was ironic coming from me, someone
yeah,
who quit that administration in protest and spent years railing against the guy. But my concern was exactly the concern we are talking about today. My
right,
concern is that if inexperienced yes men from the campaign took those key jobs running departments and agencies, if only loyalists went in who were loyal to Donald Trump and not the Constitution, we would end up with 4 years at least of total and complete law breaking. And my exhortation the day after that election was, if you got a conscience, if you care about the Constitution, even though I would not tell you it's going to be exciting or good for your career or future to go into the second Donald Trump administration, you should go do it. Now, I don't think a lot of people, Stephen, heeded
mm,
that call because, as we're seeing from this administration, it seems to be largely loyalists who have pledged fealty to Donald Trump and not the Constitution, who are running the departments and agencies of
yeah.
the federal government. But I stand by that. And there will be turnover in this administration. And I hope that people of conscience will go in and do the one thing, the bare minimum that we expect from our public servants is that they will speak truth to power.
Yeah, well, look, there are so many examples of, if you had to make a list, sort of rank the worst of the worst, but surely somewhere on that list is the person who now heads the department that you used to work at, right, at Homeland Security, and the woman who is famed for proudly boasting about shooting her own dog, which probably was put in her book to speak to one person in particular. It kind of derailed her book tour and the response to the book. But I think there's no doubt that Donald Trump heard that this was a person who said she would do anything that she's asked to do, no matter how messy she said, no matter how dirty. And that's the person who ends up running Homeland Security and becomes the critical person, right now in this, rising federal police state, and this abusive, lawless deportation operation. I assume that's got to be a particular horror to you.
Yeah, look, it absolutely is. And I was a big proponent of the creation of the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11. I served in the Bush administration, served in Dick Cheney's office and the Pentagon, and then later the Department of Homeland Security after it was created. And I felt very strongly that that department was central to
Mm,
preventing another 9/11 from happening again. And I will say, I was one of those people throughout the second term of the Bush administration and into the Obama administration who argued fervently that the Department of Homeland Security was not built to violate the civil rights and civil liberties of Americans, but to protect them. And
yeah,
I headbutted rhetorically people who said that this department could be abused to violate the rights of Americans en masse. And I will say with some humility that I was wrong. And many
yeah,
of those civil libertarians were right. And that's because my failure of imagination was never anticipating that such an obvious would be autocrat could rise to the presidency in the modern era. And that meant the young Department of Homeland Security that had yet to develop a lot of the safeguards and legacy oversight of departments like the Defense Department would be liable to be misused to become something of a pocket police for the
yeah,
President of the United States. And that's what we have seen with my former department. And that's unfortunate. There are 250,000 brave American men and women who serve in that department who want to just help keep bad people and bad things, dangerous
yeah,
individuals out of the country and protect Americans against everything from wildfires to terrorist attacks to cyber attacks. And instead, they have largely been co opted to pursue the president's revenge agenda. And I think at best, that will take years to undo. And at worst, it requires an entire remaking of that department in the wake of this corruption.
yeah. I think that's exactly right. And look, this is, the department is relatively new in terms of American history. The reality of what's transpired is, goes back to, well, at least to the late 18th century when you had George Washington warning against the possible rise of despots who would ultimately exploit the ruins of public liberty, and here we are. Here we are, reaching a point in the country where people actually thought that having a demagogue in power who was going to, target the people they don't like would be part of the way that they would at least, if not solve, at least be consoled by their problems. So look, let's dig in with the time we have left. There's sort of two big things I want to go to. One is as surely as defiance.org and take some time to have people hear about it. But let's go back first to April. Trump released an executive order targeting you for investigation to remove your security clearances and questioned whether you committed treason by releasing sensitive information and violated the Espionage Act and Armed Justice and Homeland Security and DNI and others to investigate you. So here's the questions. How have the last 7 months been for you? How fearful have you been? How have you managed the stress? How is it that you seem to have been you were either born with or you developed these kind of remarkable nerves of steel, but how in the world have you managed in this period?
My friends like to say that I've got an allergy or a clinical aversion to bullies, and I really do. I can't stand
Mm,
it. I mean,
mm,
interpersonally, if I'm in a room and someone's bullying someone else, I cannot stand it. If I go on one of these stupid cable news shows and there's someone sitting at the table that's a bully, I can't stand it. This
mm,
guy's the biggest bully that we've ever seen, flesh and blood, on this planet in our lives, and he deserves to be stood up to. That doesn't mean this year has been easy. This has been the hardest year for my family, the hardest year in my life. And again, like what happened in 2020, in many ways, I saw that coming because I
Yeah.
anticipated if he got reelected, we would face hardship. What I did not expect is the lengths to which Donald Trump would go. And that day, April 9th, I was coming home from the dog groomer. I have a little tiny mini Aussie doodle named Martini. And so this
How
little
many
fluff
pounds?
ball, he's 9 pounds. Uh, so this little fluff ball had just gotten cleaned at the groomer. I'm driving home. My wife gets into the driveway at the same time. She's got our baby in the car. We hop out. It was a gorgeous day here in Virginia. And we both get out of the car and we're just marveling at the day. And my phone starts buzzing in my pocket. Someone says, "You need to turn on the news. The president's talking about you in the Oval Office." And within seconds of pulling up that live stream, it was obvious to me that the way he was going to come after me was worse than what I
Mm,
expected. I expected him to revoke my clearance and add me to this sort of 21st century McCarthy
right.
blacklist. What I did not expect is that the president of the United States was going to order a federal investigation into me by name via executive order. And as I later heard from other folks, like you, Stephen, folks who study these things, this was the first time in 249 years of American history that a president had ordered in an executive order an investigation into a named critic for First Amendment protected speech. That had never happened before in the history of our country. And my wife, who also worked in government, understood the ramifications. And we went into the
Mhm,
kitchen and she looked at me, and her first question was, "Are we going to need to sell the house?" We're,
mhm.
we're, we're both lifelong public servants. It's not like we amassed a whole bunch of money in our brief time in the private sector. And so
Right.
we knew that it would be so expensive to defend against this that the only way we could afford it, if we didn't have support, was to sell our home and to figure out what to do next. That's the reality of being caught in the crosshairs of a guy like this. But it doesn't stop there with having to think about selling your home to defend your family.
Yeah.
The death threats were almost immediate, not just against me, against my wife, against
Yeah.
my child. I mean, people hunted my family members' social media accounts to find pictures of our baby through which to intimidate and threaten us. That's what this environment is like. Now, I'm really lucky, Stephen, in the sense that I have been outspoken. I
Yeah.
have a lot of people who are supportive of me, and I'm deeply grateful because people around the country who I've never met said, "Don't worry, we're going to crowdsource your legal defense." And within days, had a legal defense fund
Yeah.
set up that we're able to rely upon to defend ourselves against this. But the part that doesn't get talked about as much when people are in these situations is the level of social fear today
Mm,
is unlike anything we've seen before, unlike anything we've seen in the modern era in this country. And I experienced that. Very close friends and very close family members in the wake of that executive order distanced themselves from us, not because they thought I was guilty
right.
of treason, the highest
Right.
crime envisioned in the Constitution, but because they were scared
Yeah.
by association.
Right.
That didn't even happen in 2020 when I came forward. So this was bizarre to deal with people who had been in my wedding, people who have been close to us as a family saying, "Hey, we're going to need to take a step back." That was really a gut punch, but also told us a lot about how successful Donald Trump has been in his campaign of mass intimidation to try to silence dissent.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's response to bullies is by saying the only thing that a bully understands is a punch in the face, which seems about right to me. And, like you, I think for me, bullies and liars are pretty much at the top of my list of people that I cannot tolerate. I mean, if we're talking about history, I mean, I do feel like, in some ways, I didn't talk about it during the first term in terms of the reflections of Trump and the regime in terms of Nazi Germany, but it becomes increasingly unavoidable this time around. And I think we surely weren't alive in those days. We're surely here in this period. And so it becomes our, I think, sort of duty, responsibility, opportunity, in some ways to sort of stand up what what you believe is right in the face of a liar and a bully who is, doing what he can to disassemble, the world that Americans for 249 years have worked to build. So this is our moment, and I appreciate that for you. It's standing up in a particular way helps to have a platform. It helps to have crowdsourcing. It helps to have, I'm sure, a supportive family that helps you to get through it. But the more likely response would have been to go profile, avoid escalation. Instead, you've launched defiance.org. So talk about that. Talk about why it's important for you and what you hope that the group can accomplish.
Well, I would emphasize that point you just made about most people
Mm,
recommended that we lay low, that my wife and I lay low in the wake of this. And that might surprise some folks because when you're watching something like this transpire from the outside, you say, well, that's obviously wrong. They've just accused you of a crime tantamount to murder. And, surely your response is going to be to go out there to the microphones and say, I'm innocent. This is crazy. This is unconstitutional, and to fight it. And you'd be right. From the outside, that looks easy to do. But when this happens to you, within days, almost everyone important to you in your life says, please don't do it. This is
mm.
already bad enough. It's already scary enough. If you just lay low, hopefully he'll move on. He moves on to a new crisis every day.
Because they were
And,
worried for you.
and probably a lot of them were worried for themselves. That if I fought back against the president, it would increase the risks of him following through on those threats, of him making an investigation worse. And we had to have those very real conversations, me and my wife. And we knew that if the decision was to punch back, it would vastly increase the risks to us. And credit to her for having a spine of steel.
Yeah,
My wife was the one that said, this is wrong. And if we don't fight back, then we deserve to feel guilty because we've made it that much easier for him to do this to the
yeah.
next family and to the next family and the next family. And since that conversation, we've never looked back.
Yeah, and
And
can I just add in there? I mean, the law firms that capitulated, the universities that capitulated, the business that capitulated. There's no end to the capitulation once it begins, and
yeah,
it's the who've in fact stood up, who've had the ability to push back, and with the help of the courts and so forth. It underscores, I think, J.B. Pritzker's point.
that's right.
The only thing that a bully understands.
Yeah, and we, despite being under federal investigation, didn't want to lay low and
Mm,
cower. I think it's wrong. I know that I'm not guilty of treason to the United States. In fact, if I was guilty of treason, Stephen, why on earth am I sitting here without
yeah,
handcuffs on my hand and speaking to you? If
yeah,
I was guilty of that crime, again, which is equivalent to murder in terms of
yeah.
how it's handled by this country, I should be sitting in a jail cell. Well, the answer is because I'm not guilty and that there's no evidence of that. And the president inverted the justice system in this executive order and basically said, Miles is guilty of this crime. And by the way, please help me go find the evidence,
Yeah.
departments and agencies, and dispatched them to go find the evidence. Will they try to find something like they've done to Adam Schiff or James Comey and Letitia James? I'm certain they will. And every day we wake up anticipating the possibility of the FBI coming down our driveway.
Mm.
That's not an easy way
No,
to live. Is
that's not.
every day hearing that series of sensors we have out there. Is it the UPS guy or
Mm,
is it the feds? And I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. But despite all of that, like Hannah, my wife, had said, we cannot abide allowing this to happen to other people. And so that word defiance really for us as a couple had become the word that pulled us out of a funk. I'm not going to lie. We spent a
yeah,
couple of months navel gazing and really stressed out about all these things that had been happening to us. Put aside the
uh,
investigation, it was
you're
the
not.
social impacts in our lives, our family members, our friends, our finances. The business we had built blew up completely because our business partners ran away from us. But it was this literal word defiance that was like a switch flip in our heads. And I'm sure people who've been through trauma before have had a similar experience where that mental reframing from I am the victim and my life is falling apart Two, I can take control again, was enough to totally change our outlook. And after a few months, we were in conversations about how could we scale this? How could we scale
Yeah.
the feeling we've had as a family in figuring out how much control we get back by deciding to fight back and give that to other people? And it sounds maybe overly simplistic, but it was like well, let's go do a domain search and see if
Yeah.
defiance.org is available. And let's see if we can do for other people and other causes what's been done to us, which is crowdsource courage,
Yeah.
crowdsource support, crowdsource efforts to fight back. And so that's why we announced the organization. We called Defiance.org a club for courageous Americans because we kept getting asked the question, what can I do? How can I
Yeah.
push back? Which said to me, there needed to be a club of people asking that same question. And we do something very simple. Every single week, members of Defiance.org, they get served up a different opportunity of groups to support and actions that they can take around the country to fight back against these abuses of power during the Trump administration. That's it. Very simple. Rinse, repeat every single week, different ways people can fight back. And we didn't want finances to be a barrier. People can become a member of Defiance.org for $1 a month or
Yeah.
$1,000 a month.
Yeah.
Whatever they can do to go support those great causes out there. And those causes exist. We didn't want to go create a new organization that was doing the work. We're a tiny little organization that's mostly focused on identifying who's the best athlete out there for each of these different power abuses. How can we provide them funds to support what they're doing? And then how can we give our members specific actions to get involved in that
Yeah.
every single week? And I'm going to do that until this administration's over. Even if,
Yeah.
Stephen, they put me in jail and they cuff me, I'm still going to run Defiance.org from behind a jail cell and make sure that people are fighting back against this administration because there is strength in numbers. That's
Yeah.
what we realized as a family. I think that's what Americans are going to realize as we relearn this collective action muscle.
Well, that's exactly right. And look, I hope people will check out defiance.org. I hope, I hear every day, honestly, from subscribers and followers and readers and so forth that, what do I do? Right? How do I make a difference? What is the thing that I can do that's going to uh, not only, help, but also give me that agency when I'm feeling, discouraged or demoralized or despair or feel like giving up. How do I engage in a way that's going to make a difference? And so, you're offering a concrete example of it in terms
Well,
of
and Stephen, if I can just say, I get the unrepeatable experience of joy now every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern because we
Mhm.
do these weekly spotlights as an organization. And every week we give away our money to an amazing group that's doing incredible work. Every week it's usually bad news, bad news, bad news. Every newsletter,
Yeah.
every publication you read is like, here's how your republic is falling apart. But once a week, we all get together as a club and we say, we're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
And here's
Yeah.
$50,000 to protect whistleblowers. And here's $50,000 to go out there and help communities sound the alarm when ICE is coming in, and on and on and on. That is a moment of positivity that we hadn't had built into our lives
Fantastic.
that now we get every single week.
Fantastic. So, two more things, and I'll let you go. One, um, does this work give you optimism that most Americans do oppose the regime and will do their part? I mean, can do their part. Let's start there.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, look, nothing's inevitable. I don't think I don't think the decline of the American Republic is a certainty, but I think it's a possibility, which is what should be alarming to folks. I mean, I'm what you would call an optimistic fatalist. I believe nature destroys everything it creates, but it also creates from everything it destroys. And so we have that choice constantly to keep what we have, to let it be destroyed, to rebuild it or not. I have gotten, I think, more encouragement since October 18th than I'd had that Americans are trending the direction of
Super.
collective action. But here's the
Yeah.
thing, Stephen, we're
There's more
having
to
to
be
relearn
done.
that. I mean, most folks who are alive right now have never experienced a moment of mass collective action. And so, even though we have a litany of examples going back hundreds of years, we constantly have to relearn those examples. And we're in that learning process right now. And I think
Yeah.
moving towards an execution process in 26 and 27.
Yeah, look, I think, the No Kings protests with 7 million people in October, that was another one of those muscle building events. I think there need to be more. I think they need to be larger. I think we need more Americans who decide, they're going to speak out in whatever ways they can. Defiance.org is one of those ways. Do it in all the social media platforms, and be kind to your neighbors, and be supportive of your vulnerable friends and neighbors, when and if that happens. Last question. It's hard to do quickly, but give it a try. How does this end? And do you think repair is possible?
I think repair is possible, but I also think we shouldn't fear the alternative. The only alternative is not violent civil war.
Mm,
And this is something I try to impress upon folks. I think we are in a moment as consequential as the American Revolution or the Civil War or one of the great wars. This moment is as consequential. But like those episodes, they didn't just end in total darkness and tyranny. There is the opportunity to rebuild on the other side. Now, in one of the worst case scenarios, we might have to revisit our fundamental social compact, the United States Constitution, and how our polity is constructed. That may be required of this extraordinary moment. That certainly is not inevitable either. But we also shouldn't be afraid of that
yeah.
because America was built, as trite as it sounds, on truly timeless ideals. And no one and nothing can kill those ideas. Nothing, nothing, nothing. They can always be copied, pasted, reconstructed, rebuilt, whether it's here or somewhere else. We always have the opportunity to rebuild this. I think we are going to have a very dark several years, but we will have the opportunity, if we choose it, to reconstruct the republic. And hopefully, that can be a simpler process and a peaceful process, but we will always have that choice. And I do have optimism, Stephen, that we're going to be able to do it. I can't tell you what form it's going to take. And
Yeah.
I'm going to be the one out there pushing for peaceful, nonviolent reform. It's the only pathway to avoid the very ugly scenarios. But we have a lot of optionality within that pathway. But we'll need some leaders who take some very tough decisions in the next few years here after Donald Trump.
Well, that's exactly right, and I think it requires accountability. I mean, I don't think we get through this period and just say like, "Oh, we survived that, let's move on." I think there's a responsibility that comes with whoever's in a position of power in the coming years to say, the wrongs that have been committed, the laws that have been broken, the violations of our democratic compact require us to address those, and because only the addressing of it is how you ever really get through it and ultimately are able to overcome it. So thank you so much for this, a fantastic conversation. I think other people have felt the same way. It's become almost a cliche, I guess, but the reason why cliches survive is because they're usually true. Courage is contagious, and so your courageous example really matters. I hope everyone who's been listening today, will check out Miles's Substack. We'll check out Defiance.org. If you're not a subscriber to America, please become one. And honestly, I hope we can have a conversation like this again, not too long from now.
Well, Stephen, I'm very grateful for you, my friend, everything you've done, your courage in this fight. And I would say to folks that are listening, we're going to get through this. And we, as insipid as it sounds, we're going to get through it together. And there's a lot of encouragement and strength in this community already, and we'll get there. So thank you so much for your leadership throughout this.
Thanks so much, and thanks for everyone for joining us. We'll see you.